Welcome to The Backstory with Dr. Ricky Singh. This podcast is focused on bringing you the latest research-based information about dramatically improving health, well-being, and quality of life. And here's your host, Dr. Ricky Singh.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Backstory podcast, and thank you for joining me today and taking time from your busy schedule. I hope you're having a good week. And today I want to talk about something that's come up a lot in my life, especially surrounding my marathon training. And this is regarding stretching. I talk a lot about exercise, and we know how important exercise is. But what about stretching? Does stretching really take a back seat to all the exercise that we do in our lives? If you're like most of us, you were probably taught about the importance of warming up in grade school. And you've probably continued pretty much the same routine ever since. But science has changed, the field of stretching and warming up has changed, so I want to share with you what's new in stretching. But first, let's talk about the benefits of stretching in the first place. Use it or lose it is an often quoted maxim, but it's never more appropriate now when we're talking about flexibility. Think about a long car journey, thinking about sitting at your desk all day, lasting hours and hours and hours. And finally, when you arrive at your destination or you get out of your chair at work, the feeling of stretching is extremely welcomed. And initially, your movements are probably a little stiff and awkward. However, after stretching out, you feel much better and your normal mobility gradually returns. Imagine if you sat in a car forever or sat in your work chair for weeks at a time. Obviously, you can imagine how much your flexibility would suffer, which is why the term use it or lose it means more than ever when it relates to mobility and flexibility. The reality is that the studies about the benefits of stretching have had mixed results. On one hand, some research shows that stretching doesn't reduce muscle soreness after exercise. Studies also show that lengthening the muscle and holding a stretch immediately before a sprint or an exercise actually worsens performance. However, the research has shown that stretching can improve flexibility and as a result, the motion around your joints. So some of the benefits of stretching include, but aren't limited to, improving your performance in physical activities, decreasing your risk of injuries, helping your joints move through their full range of motion, of course, increasing blood flow, enabling your muscles to work more effectively, and something probably understated is improving your abilities to do what you want to do in life. In addition to these benefits of stretching, I also want to share with you some of the misinformation out there regarding warming up and exercising. So the first is, most of us, myself included, tend to only post-exercise stretch and not pre-exercise stretch. And many people stretch at the tail end of their workout, but forego it at the beginning. However, is this the right way to do things? Stretching beforehand can help loosen your muscles and increase your range of motion. This probably makes you less prone to injury. And even just 15 minutes of stretching pre-workout has been proven to help with injury prevention. This is probably the perfect time to do what's called dynamic stretching, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. The second myth or misinformation or reason patients injure themselves is that we don't warm up enough. You know, whether you've just woken up or haven't moved around much that day or come straight from work, your muscles are rigid, really rigid. And jumping literally into a pre-workout stretch without the proper warm-up is going to set you up for more pain than gain that day. And you may think of stretching as a warm-up before physical exertion, but you actually need a warm-up before your warm-up. So a pre-stretching warm-up will increase your body's core temperature, make the muscles more pliable, generate blood flow to the muscles and connective tissues and the tendons. And the warm-up should be light aerobic activity. So one thing that I do in the morning before I work out, which is when I do my exercise, I jog in place or I do jumping jacks. These are ways for me to prepare my muscles before I start stretching and eventually before my intense exercise follows. So jumping jacks, jogging in place, brisk walk, all these ways are to warm up, to raise your heart rate, to raise your respiratory rate, all in an effort to increase your blood flow. And what you'll notice is that this activity will loosen your muscles and you'll have increased benefits from stretching and strengthening. And most importantly, you're going to avoid more injury. So before you get into your stretch session, always include a pre-stretch warm-up. The third thing we see a lot is that patients and people in general tend to hold their breath while stretching. And I used to do that before learning the proper way to stretch. And believe it or not, conscious breathing actually makes stretching more effective. Many individuals unintentionally hold their breath with stretching, which can cause muscles to become more tense and more resistant. Conversely, if you breathe while you stretch, this increases blood flow and delivers oxygen to the muscles. So by breathing deeply and slowly, mostly through the nose while you stretch, your muscles are more likely to relax and more likely to be receptive to the stretch. So what's the best practice when it comes to stretching? First, the warm-up. And the right warm-up should do two things: loosen the muscles and tendons and increase motion to the various joints. Literally, you're just warming up the body. Again, when you're at rest, there's less blood flow to the muscles and they stiffen. So a well-designed warm-up starts by increasing body heat, increasing blood flow. Warm muscles and dilated blood vessels pull oxygen from the bloodstream, and it makes utilization of your muscle fuel more effective and more efficient. And the best way to raise your body temperature is with some light aerobic activity, like I mentioned, light jogging or jumping jacks. And most coaches and athletes have done this for years. This is why you see tennis players running around the court 4 or 5 times before a match, or you see marathoners doing high knees or doing high kicks, kicking themselves in the behind right before the starting line, all ways to warm up and bring up their core temperature. And when you are warming up, you should be exercising at about 40% of your maximum heart rate. So a very, very easy pace where you can obviously have a conversation with someone and maybe progressing to about 50% of your maximum heart rate. The warm-up should be about 5 to 10 minutes and recovering for 5 minutes before you start stretching or start your exercise routine. Now, back to stretching. There are fundamentally 2 main types of stretching. And although it may seem obvious, there are actually different ways to stretch. It isn't as easy as just doing toe touches like you thought of in the past. But most importantly, doing the wrong type of stretch at the wrong time can either result in injuries or really adversely affect your performance. So let's break down the differences among the styles and when to do them. In terms of stretching before sports, dynamic stretches have a better reputation. It is the static stretches that have been shown to reduce performance and also make it easier to injure yourself if you do it within 30 minutes of exercise. But the most important thing when it comes to dynamic stretching is that you are moving throughout the stretch and you are trying to move your joints and muscles through the entire range of motion. The other type of stretching is called static stretching. And when most people hear the word stretch, you think about holding a stretching pose for a short period of time. Static stretching consists of elongating a certain muscle until you feel it pull. And this is typically the furthest range of motion. These stretches are done without much movement and should be held for at least 30 to 60 seconds. Static stretching is best done after a workout, and studies have shown that this can help relieve muscle fatigue, help speed recovery. And some popular stretches that you see runners do are butterfly stretches to stretch out the groin, single leg hamstring stretches to stretch out the back of your legs, and arm over chest stretch to open up the back and stretch out the chest. And as I mentioned before, the old presumption of sitting and holding a stretch for 20 to 30 seconds before a workout is completely wrong. It actually weakens the muscles. In a recent study done at the University of Nevada, athletes generated less force from their leg muscles after static stretching than they did had they not stretched at all. And what they found was static stretching prior to a workout can decrease muscle strength as much as 30%. So how often should you be stretching? Ideally, stretching the major muscles either before or after a workout should be done at least twice a week. And if you can complete 2 10-minute stretching sessions every week, you are well on your road to keeping mobile, keeping supple, and most importantly, trying to stay injury-free. So let's talk about some of the overall stretching do's and don'ts. So first, what to do when stretching. First and foremost, ensure that the muscle being stretched is thoroughly warmed up. Do static stretching at the end of your training session. Always relax, always breathe through the stretching. When doing static stretching, Hold each stretch for a minimum of 30 and ideally 60 seconds. Try to follow an all over the body program that stretches to avoid postural imbalances. Always try to follow proper technique and avoid overstretching. And what are some of the stretching don'ts? Don't try to stretch a cold muscle. This is a recipe for disaster. Always stretch before your workout and after your warm-up. Don't hold a stretch for a few seconds, as you will achieve no benefit. Don't hold your breath, and don't just focus on hamstring stretches. Really incorporate an all over the body routine. And based on the patients that I see in the office, based on what some family and friends consult me about, I have compiled a list of areas that you should focus on when starting your stretching routine. Certainly this is not all encompassing, but these 5 overall areas will help you get on the right track and hopefully avoid injury in the future. So the first is your hamstrings. Now, the hamstrings are very susceptible to injuries, and people who participate in sports that involve running and sprinting are prone to developing tightness in these muscles. And the hamstrings refer to the 3 muscles in the back of the thigh that run from the hip or the buttock all the way to the knee. These muscles help us walk, help us run, help us go from sitting to standing. And because people use their muscles, their hamstrings, in everyday movements such as walking, it's important to keep these muscles loose. So stretching your hamstrings will help you avoid strains and muscle tears. The second area is the hip flexors. With all the sitting we do these days, it's no surprise that the hip flexor is a major contributor to lumbar spine pain. So tight hip flexors can lead to pain in the back and hence impair your performance. In addition, our sedentary lives has a common problem and a major contributor to restricted hip extension flexibility. So keeping your hip flexors, or the muscle known as the iliopsoas, is very, very important, even to help with your spine pain. The third area is your glutes, your butt. And your glutes work hard every day. They help you in walking, climbing stairs, standing up from a chair. The glutes consist of 3 large muscles, the gluteus maximus, the gluteus medius, and the gluteus minimus. And the glutes attach to the bones in the hip, the back, the pelvis, the legs. And this is why, if your glutes are tight, you might feel tension not only in your butt, but also in your back, also in your hips, also in your thighs. So keeping your glutes flexible and mobile are very important to functional mobility. Lower back, if you suffer from lower back, the range of treatment options can be overwhelming, and often the right choice for you depends on what's causing your pain and what are the physical demands of your life. But the good news is, for many people, back pain can clear up with little or no medical intervention in just a few weeks. One of my favorite exercises and stretches that I prefer and refer to patients is the cat camel. So a real good way to stretch out the lower back and also stretch out the abdominals in the front to release stress on some of the elements of the spine. And the last area is chest stretching. These days, with all the Zoom calls and all the patients who sit at the desks most of their lives, we see that round shouldered posture is one of the main contributors to neck and upper back pain, and also to rotator cuff injuries. And rounded shoulder posture feels comfortable, and it feels natural because the chest muscles are so tight. So in order to release that tension, the purpose of pectoral stretching, or the pec muscles, is to lengthen the chest so that you can maintain a healthier posture and healthier positioning, which will take the stress off your upper back, shoulder blade region, and eventually your rotator cuff. So to summarize, stretching can help prevent injuries, it can reduce muscle tension, it can improve your flexibility, but it's crucial to practice proper stretching techniques, when to do them, which ones to do, and how to do them correctly. And if you follow that mantra, you will avoid injury and improve overall mobility. Your stretching routine should be customized to you. What are your sport-specific activities? What do you want to do? What are your physical strengths and weakness? And from there, collaborating with a physical therapist or a trainer can really be beneficial in order to prevent injury. I like to leave you with this quote: "In the end, it is better to bend than it is to break." And thank you out there to tuning in to the backstory. Happy stretching, and we've got your back. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Backstory. Please subscribe, rate the podcast, and review The Backstory on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Play Music. And feel free to share this podcast on social media or even your own website or blog. This podcast is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice. To learn more about Dr. Singh and his clinical research, please follow him on social media. You can also sign up for his newsletter by going to www.rickysinghmd.com. That's RICKYSINGHMD.com.